So I started listening to Audible in my car on my way to and back from work. And I settled on something called like Nettle and Bone. It was some like book I had like in my Audible library. I don't know if it was recommended to me. I have a lot of stuff there from like a lot of recommendations, and I started listening to it. And for the first 50 like for the first hour or so, I was super into it. It was like dark, it was brooding. I love the prose. I love the narration. I love the idea. She like takes a skeleton and assembles it and turns it to a living dog. Like I love that. It was so cool. And then it segues into like typical woke nonsense. Like, oh, I don't want to be a mother. I don't want to be married. And I do think this is like the typical tactic that every single like leftist author uses with like all of these books. Like they all follow the same pattern. Like I've noticed this a couple of times. Like you have like the really cool, intriguing beginning with like a unique setup, and then it segues into stuff that nobody cares about, right? Like, oh, and pointless political drama with this poorly thought out setting with these characters that aren't interesting and aren't engaging and aren't relatable at all. They're not compelling, they're not charming, they don't have a lot going on. They're not interesting. You don't understand what this has to do with the beginning of the book, and then it like starts setting up like, ooh, there's a man. Ooh, and the character has to marry this man, and like in this specific instance, like I think what's happening, like I wasn't paying super close attention, is that like the guy is marrying all of her sisters, and then like they're dying in mysterious ways basically, and like she's next. Ooh. And eventually, like I'm reading this, like I'm listening to this, and I'm starting to pick up on like the implications of like what's going on here, right? Like again, like I mentioned before, this is demonizing the idea of motherhood. This is demonizing the idea of being a wife. Like, oh, I don't want to be married. I want to be free forever. Like, how dare, how dare you think that how dare like the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to a woman is to get married and have a child. Like, oh, like it's really interesting when you like start reading these kind of books that are like, I looked at the description and it's like recommended by a lot of very interesting individuals, people who I'm sure have been like very heavily involved in pushing woke stuff over the years, people like Oprah and stuff like that. It's interesting like looking at that and like noticing it and like realizing like where the story was going to go, right? And yeah, I was right. I picked up on that, and then it started getting worse and worse and worse, more and more blatant, more and more ridiculous, until we got to like the point where like one of the sister's daughters dies, like the baby dies, okay? Like they get a message in the mail, and like the protagonist, Mara, is told this, and she's just like, oh, I'm so happy that it was the baby and not my sister. Fuck off with that bullshit. I immediately shut that shit off, right? Because I know how people act when they lose a child. Okay? Like I know what the reality of that situation is that everyone is upset. Everyone is traumatized. Even if you've never met the kid, you are upset by it cuz it's not a good thing to happen. So to like sit there and say like, "Oh, I'm glad it wasn't my sister." Bullshit. Complete crap. Okay? Like to me it's just such a weird like that really emphasizes the self-centered nature of like the protagonist and like the setting, right? Like woke stuff in general. Like, yeah, you don't have empathy for other people, right? You don't have any real acknowledgement. Like, it's just like people don't actually act this way. And they seriously try and tell you that like, oh, it's a good thing the baby died. No, it's not actually. It's not like it's again, when you're like looking for this stuff and you like start noticing it, like you can see the conditioning, right? Like this is what I'm talking about when it comes to like books targeted towards women, because I do think it's safe to say this book was targeted towards women, considering what it's about and like the themes and stuff like that. Like it's demonizing motherhood. It's demonizing having children. like, oh, you don't want children because they're work and that takes away time for yourself. Like, no, like that isn't how you should look at it, right? Responsibility is a good thing. It gives you more freedom. It gives you more, like, it allows you to contribute to the world. Like, there's nothing wrong with being selfless and like doing things for another person, right? Like, and again, but again, they keep doing this thing where like, oh man, it's so bad. Like this setup is so terrible. Like, is it though? Like, is it though? She has a baby. Like, what could be more terrible than that? Like having a baby. It's it's ridiculous. It really is absurd. And I do think like this is one of those things that uh people do need to start talking about because like I've seen this like way too many times to really consider it a coincidence, right? Like it's one of those things where you're just like you see it so many times, you start to see the pattern and you start to see the push. Like again, this is like the ideology in motion, right? Like this is what they're pushing on to people. This is what they want people to actually think. You know, this is what they want them to how they want them to react in these situations, right? And I have to wonder like how many people would like actually fall for it. How many people are manipulated by it? Like again, like it's interesting when you look at like what's going on in the conservative circles because everyone's like raging about like woke stuff and like masculine circles, you know, like Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff like that. But like when you have like stuff that's more targeted towards like a female demographic, you know, stuff like the Barbie movie, like it feels like we don't have as well-rounded of an analysis, right? Because like I feel like women don't really like analyze their products the way they do. Like the Barbie movie is just a feminist movie, right? So that means it's a good movie, right? By their mindset. They don't really like think about like what actually happens in it or like what the implications are or what like the movie is trying to tell you like, "Oh, it's Barbie, so it must be good." Is kind of is kind of the mindset behind supporting it, right? And I'm really curious if like how successful the Barbie movie was as propaganda. Because I keep seeing like everyone come out and say that like yeah, you know, uh like speak up about how like it treats men and stuff like that. So I don't know how true that is because I have no intention of seeing the movie, right? Like, you know, I'm not gonna go see Barbie. You know, this is coming from someone who just played like Princess Peach Showtime. I'm not gonna see Barbie. You know, I have a better female video game character, right? But like again, it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? Like, what kind of ideas are people deriving from these entertainment properties? Like, are people coming away with disgusting, warped worldviews because of these products? Or have people developed enough where they can call this out for what it is? Like, in masculine circles, I think it is reaching the point where, like, people know what the problem is, right? You know, the red pill community knows, like, everybody in my circle knows, like, it's really common. But, like, with more female oriented stuff, like, I think it's like, par for the course. You know, like I think there's not really a lot of condemnation from it yet. So I'm really curious, like when that's going to happen. I really wonder at what point there's going to be kind of a backlash to the feminist ideology. Like the one thing that I think like really kills a feminist, like the major thing that like kills all, like the even the most hardcore feminists, like if they have a son, like that's the thing that like really kills feminism, I think, for a lot of people is that like if you have a son and you see how he's treated by other people, like you start like associating more with like masculine thinking. That's kind of like if you're a good mother. Of course there are like always exceptions, but like you know that's the one thing that I've seen like that's kind of a constant is that like if you have a male lead. So if you have like a son, so I'm curious if like you know maybe if we could get like some kind of major media property with like a male lead, like a female oriented one with a male lead. I'm curious if that could like kind of steer people more towards like the red pill community. I'm curious. I wonder, right? But like the Barbie movie seems like kind of an anomaly, right? Because it was so highly successful in this like current culture where like everyone else is calling out woke shit, right? Like it's really interesting to me that the movie was got as much publicity as it did. So anyway, um, yeah, my thoughts on that are pretty clear. Like woke stuff, woke nonsense is definitely dying, But like I think there is no denying that we still have a very, very, very long while to go.